Hi guys, today I'm going to be reviewing Haxor, the Divide EP, and yeah, hope you enjoy, and yeah, let's get into it. So first up on this EP we have a song called Biome First. Now this song we get met with kind of ambient, airy kind of background synths in the background and a kind of detuned pluck. I do think the effects across this whole EP were really interesting and generally well fitting. I thought that the use of effects in this track was pretty cool and the delay was pretty good. I also thought I think the fact that the percussion was also quite interesting and the mix was clean really improved this track. This track does feel a bit like a copy of the Biome First by C418. The structure and the general composition is pretty much identical. There is an interesting use of delay in this, and he has changed some of the instruments and some synths in this track. And I'm sure the composition the arrangement isn't identical, but it feels more like a remix. It feels a bit unoriginal, and actually at the end, the ambience and the light plucks are almost identical to what Biome First has. So overall, I'm gonna obviously have my rankings of this EP on the screen. This was probably one of my least favourite tracks off the EP. Maybe not my least favourite, but one of them. I just thought it was a little bit uninteresting compared to some other stuff he's made. But yeah, anyway, not a terrible opener, but I was a little bit unimpressed that he had basically just copied Biome First and just put his own twist on it, but hadn't really changed it very much. Okay, next we have Step featuring Lurum, and this is one of the best tracks off the EP. We've got some really nice percussion and some really cool effects. The bass is really crisp and clean and sort of distorted, but not too distorted. The hi-hats pattern really adds to the groove of the track. The drums are really crisp, clean, precise, concise. The build synth is perfect for actually building the track up to the drop, and the drop bass is fantastic, perfectly kind of punchy and growly and sort of sinister, but yet clean and crisp at the same time. And it really adds to the groovy feel of the track. And the song structure is great too. I think the length was good. I think it was kind of a very mature track, and the mix is very crispy. But my only criticism of this track really is the kind of wispy synth going dun 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 dun. I haven't really sung that melody very well, but that sort of synth in the drop was just kind of annoying more than anything, and it kind of just distracts the listener from the bass melody, which is absolutely brilliant. But other than that, I'd give this a very solid 8 out of 10, as opposed to the Biome First 6.5 out of 10, and this is one of my favourites off the whole EP. Very good track. Next we have a track called The Divide featuring Indiegogo, and this is a pretty good track. The intro melody is really intriguing, and then the beat that we get, the break beat, is fantastic. It almost feels like a drum and bass beat, but it's actually break beat. And the percussion and the effects are really cool. And I think overall the ambient effects and the kind of background synth you hear in the drop really add to the drop. And I think the drop feels kind of melancholy whilst being peaceful as well. The chords are interesting, and the drop melody is also very pleasant. I do think that the distortion and the kind of bass in the drop is not really needed. It just kind of gets in the way of what otherwise is a really pleasant experience. And the second drop kind of feels like a copy and paste of the first drop, except you just added in a really annoying growl synth, which is just screechy and annoying, and it doesn't work in my opinion. But other than that, this is a really good track. Probably not my favourite. It's probably a mid-range track, but it's not bad and it's not amazing, but it's overall pretty solid. And it's nice to see that I finally enjoy a track with Indiegogo as the feature, because his last two tracks that he's featured on haven't been my favourites. Next we have State Lines, and this track is fantastic. Probably my favourite off the album, to be brutally honest. Yeah, this is my favourite track of the album. The intro piano is eerie, yet sad, yet interesting. I love the delay, I love the detune on the piano. I also love the complex and multiple melodies, including the background melodies that you hear in very stereoed. They really add to the kind of atmosphere and ambience of the track. I really like the pad that comes in. It's very nice on the ears, almost like a heavenly kind of pad. And I really like the dramatic drum, bass and ARP switch up that we hear. It's a very welcome change, and it almost is interesting. I always like music that surprises you, and that kind of surprised me, but in a good way. And the orchestral section that follows is very overwhelming and emotional, and actually captures you for quite a bit. And it feels like a C4, feels like a Haxor take on a C418 track called Alpha, where it kind of builds up and overwhelms you, and then cools down, which is what a lot of his tracks do actually. But it just feels like a more interesting take on that, really. And it was kind of the switch up that really made this track what it was. It was an okay track, and I liked the piano in the start, and it was kind of the ambience and effects were quite cool, but I really was surprised by that switch up, and the mix is also very clean. I don't really have that much to say. Perhaps maybe the drums were slightly too loud, but I guess that was also the part of the point. But ultimately, this is a fantastic track. So yeah, absolutely my favourite on the album. Not really a lot wrong with this. So next we have Drumskin, which is the final track of this EP. This is probably my least favourite track on the whole thing, but only really because the drop is poor in my opinion. I really like the intro pluck and the chords. They're very nice, pleasant on the ears, well made. I like the kind of subtleness of the attack and the decay on the pluck. It's really pleasant. I like the intro melody. I think it's quite a cool melody actually. It sounds like the melody in Muse, but just better. I think the build is really interesting as well. The various effects we hear come in, the heaviness of the drums, different plucks and synths we hear. I think the way that's orchestrated is really nice. And then unfortunately the drop ruins the track for me. I just think the drop is just, I'm quite biased because I don't like drops that aren't melodic, and I really don't like heavy stuff like this in EDM really. But yeah, I think the high end is too loud and harsh in the drop, and perhaps needs to be toned down, and that's just a mixing error. The clap is too loud, and I think the drop lacks any real melody. It's just kind of drums and harsh drums and percussion, which I guess some people might find cool, and I guess you could say it's interesting, but it certainly isn't, for me, what I'd consider very melodic, and it's not particularly pleasant to listen to in my opinion. So this track is probably my least favourite. But I do think the outro is quite nice actually. That has to be said. I think the outro pluck, synth and the chords and the way it fades away into the ambience and the crackle and the effects is very cool, and I think that ultimately this could have been a really good track if the drop had been something different, or if it didn't even have to have a drop. And that's one thing I really like about State Lines, just coming back to it. It didn't even feel like State Lines had a drop, it just progressed as a track. This thing, yeah, didn't feel great. But overall, yeah. That's what I thought of Drumskin. So this EP as a whole sees Haxor progress very nicely from Rain Season. Generally speaking, the mixing is a lot better and the production is a lot better on this EP than there was on Rain Season. I think the sound design's better. I think the melodies and the chords are more complex and more mature and more interesting. I think the compositions and the arrangements are more interesting. I think the collabs are perhaps more carefully chosen, and I think more equally distributed. I think the basses are better. I think the pianos and the orchestral elements are way better sounding. I think the effects are more interesting and there's more of them. And I think the use of delay, things like that, and automations is much more concise, but yet well used on this album. Ultimately, I think this is a very good EP, and this is a real step forward for Haxor and a real improvement from Rain Season, so you should be very proud of that. Yes, there are a couple of tracks that are less good on this EP, but the general standard of this EP is very high, and if this was an album and this was the first 5 tracks on the album, I'd be looking forward to the rest of the album a lot. My general favourites from this EP are State Lines and The Step, but I think that I do think that the Divide and Biome First are still tracks that are worth checking out, with Drumskin being probably the one that sounds like it's been chucked into the EP and maybe just left to rot on the side. But overall, a very solid EP. I'm going to give this EP a 7.5 out of 10, maybe even push that up to a 7.8. And yeah, pretty solid EP from Haxor, and I think definitely improvement on Rain Season, no doubt about that.